Okay, this video is to help people understand what a letter of map amendment or a LOMA is for. So what is a letter of map amendment? A letter of map amendment or a LOMA is a way of removing a structure from the federal requirement that it has to have flood insurance if the structure has a mortgage. Basically what federal law requires is that if a structure is in a floodplain area of high hazard and has a mortgage, it has to have flood insurance. So let's look at some of the types of floodplains that we have. This is a view of one of the areas of Santa Cruz County along the Santa Cruz River. It demonstrates most of the different types of floodplains that we have commonly in Santa Cruz County. So to start off with, we have the low area of risk, the Zone X, followed by the sheet flooding area, Zone AO, the Zone AE, which is a floodplain with elevations where it's been calculated. And then we have the Zone A approximate floodplain, which in Santa Cruz County, Arizona, is basically the geologic floodplain. The other one that we have, which isn't shown on here, is the Zone X moderate floodplain, which is this gray area here, which is usually the area between the 500-year floodplain and the 100-year floodplain. Now, because of the nature of the type of flooding in a Zone A and because of the way that the elevations of the flood in Zone A are determined, a letter of map amendment is usually not applicable in a Zone AO floodplain. So, what do you need in order to get a letter of map amendment approved? Generally speaking, we need to know that the ground around the structure is higher than the water surface elevation of the 1% flood or the 100-year flood event. Now, to do this, we need to know what the base flood elevation of the 1% flood is. How do you know what the 1% elevation is? Well, the easy answer to that is you can get this information from our office either through a flood hazard information sheet if we've already calculated this number in the past, or through a site review if we need to calculate it. Both of these are free services offered by the Santa Cruz County Flood Control District, so there's no cost to the property owner whatsoever. Now, once you have the elevation of the 100-year event, then what we're going to need to know is what are the elevations on the property. Specifically, we're going to need to know two elevations called the lowest adjacent grade and the highest adjacent grade, or the lag and the hag. Basically, these are the elevations immediately outside the structure itself, not elsewhere on the property, but immediately outside the structure. So to get this information, we're going to have either a professional engineer or a registered land surveyor make a survey of the elevations of the home and the ground immediately around it. If you happen to have an elevation certificate that was already done for the property, that data can be used instead, and a new survey may not be necessary. Now, the caveat to that is if the maps have changed or if the datum has changed since this elevation certificate was done and the date you're applying for the letter of map amendment. So let's take a look at an example where a letter of map amendment would be granted. Now, we need to note you cannot have placed any fill on the lot during or after construction. If any fill has been placed, then a letter of map amendment is not available, and you have to go through a letter of map revision based on fill instead. So here's an example of a house, and you can see basically where the floodplain boundary is right in here, and the house is therefore in the floodplain, and the ground drops off to the left. If we look at the elevations of the floodplain in here, we find that the water surface elevation is actually coming in and hitting the ground right here. Now, we're assuming this house was built at some point. We knew what the elevations were, and so the house was built in accordance to Arizona law, which requires it to be up a foot higher. So here's the base flood elevation. This is the regulatory elevation. If we look at the lag and the hag, what we see is that the lag is going to be in this general area, and the hag is going to be in this general area. Because the lag is higher than the base flood elevation, this structure should be granted a letter of map amendment. Let's look at an example where a letter of map amendment would not be granted. A similar situation to before, but this time the ground is dropping off much more steeply. When we come through and figure out what the base flood elevation is, we find that the base flood elevation is impinging on the ground at about this point, which means the floodplain is coming in and touching the building. The actual boundary, instead of being here, really should be right here. But the house is still built properly with the proper elevation. If we look at what the lag and the HAG say, though, what we'll see is that the HAG is up here and the lag is down here. And we can see that the lowest adjacent grade to the structure is below the base flood elevation. This means in FEMA's eyes that the water will touch the exterior of the structure, regardless of how far below the floor it is. That means the structure is in the floodplain and flood insurance is required. Now, is it impossible for the house in example 2 to get out of the flood insurance requirements? No, it's not, but it requires a different process, a letter of map revision based on fill. And that does have additional costs associated with it. You typically need engineering to show that the fill is not going to have any adverse impacts on the floodplain, especially neighboring properties or infrastructure. And there is going to be a review and submittal fee, both of which can run several $1,000s. So if you have to go through this process, you might need to look at what your budget is going to be in terms of how fast will this pay itself off. So for more information, you can check out these 2 links from FEMA talking about how you can go through the process, including the fact sheet on the bottom. I'll post these below the video. You can also feel free to contact our office, 375-7830, area code 520. Anytime Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 p.m. We'll be more than happy to help you out. Ask for either John or Marcel. And with that, thank you.